Everything went out without a hitch. Haha! I say that and something happens soon. That would be my luck, that something would happen. Okay. Okay, let's see. I think everything is fine. Mm-hmm. I didn't, Hmm. I didn't even get my ambiance music. I was forgetting something. Okay, I think this is what I'm gonna go to most of the time. Pretty sure. Okay. Hi, Fall. I think I got it. Okay, let me see. Let me make sure. Just adjusting the volume for this. Okay. Volume sounds good on my end. Okay, cool. Okay. Okay. Ooh. Okay, let's see. So, adjusting to everything. So, continue. So from last week. So to recap from last week, Asakawa brought the tape to his house. Okay, fine, whatever, because he did it because his wife never really done anything. Okay. Ew, that is gross. I don't even like mayonnaise. No, I did not. I would never order something like that. That is gross. That is disgusting. Would never. So, anyways. Yeah, I would like to see the receipt, please. Yeah, honestly, yeah, real. So, anyways. So, recapping from last week. Asakawa brought home the tape. Didn't think nothing of it because his wife usually left his shit alone. Okay, fine, whatever. And then, him and Ryuji, this shit person. So, Ryuji, the shit person, he's like the most... he's a shit person. That's just it. And then, so, Asakawa visited Ryuji because he wasn't picking up. Because he's like on 5 days already. And Ryuji's on 6. So after the whole thing with Ryuji, Asakawa went home. And he was looking at the tape and he's like, oh, why does it look different? He realized it's been watched. He knows he did not watch it. So he fucking wakes up his wife and asked her if she watched the tape. And she was just like, I didn't think nothing of it. She had her baby on her lap while she was watching it. So the baby is now on Sawako's hit list. So the whole family is in danger because his fucking wife. In terms of Light Yagami, I never been so tempted to hit a woman. Because... Oh my god, the baby, everyone, the baby is in trouble because of the wife. Okay. So now, and also Asakawa was just like, hey, if this didn't happen, hey, if I don't find out in time, his wife and child will be able to get his life insurance policy or whatever. No! Oh my god. So, there's that. So now it's a race against time, and they've figured out, different, which, once they read the tape. Oh, also, the airwaves during that time were hijacked during that night. That's what they figured out. So they've been looking through everything possibly to zero in on the locations. So they figured out the volcano location possibly, and then also the distinct dialect that one of the like the old lady that was in the tape was using. So there's that. So that's the recap of last week. So oh, let's get to it. Oh my god. The baby. The poor baby had okay, let's get to it. I can't believe this is all happening like in the span of a week, though, by the way. Okay. October 15th, Monday. Every morning when he woke up now, Asakawa found himself wishing that it had all been a dream. He called a rent-a-car place in the neighborhood and told them that he'd be in on a schedule to pick up the car he'd reserved. His wife is now involved, so I guess he's like, him and his wife are like, I guess he's taking his wife too along for the fucking ride, apparently. I don't know, probably not. They had his reservation on file. No mistake.
Why is rum always gone?
What the hell? Oh, psh. That's probably why. And hope he has open. Thank you, Jay. Thank you. They had his reservation on file, no mistake. Reality marched on without a break. He needed a way to get around if he was going to go try to find out where the broadcast had originated. It would be too hard to break in on TV frequencies with an off-the-shelf wireless transmitter. He figured that it had to have been done with an expertly modified unit. And the image on the tape was clear, with no interference. That meant that the signal had to have been strong and close. With more information, he might have been able to establish the area in which the broadcast was receivable, and thus to pinpoint the point of origin. But all he had to go on was the fact that the television in Villa Log Cabin B4 had picked up the transmission. All he could do was go there, check out the lay of the land, and then start going over the area with a fine-tooth comb. He had no idea how long it would take. He packed enough clothes for 3 days. He certainly wouldn't need any more than that, because he was gonna fucking die. They looked at each other, but Shizu didn't say anything about the video. Asakawa hadn't been able to think of a good lie, and so he let her go to bed with only the vaguest of excuses about the threat of death in a week. For her part, Shizu seemed to fear finding out anything specific, and seemed happy to let things remain ambiguous and unexplained. Maybe don't fucking play shit you don't know of. Rather than questioning him like she usually would, she seemed to guess at something on her own that made her keep an eerie silence. Asakawa didn't know exactly how she was interpreting things, but it didn't seem to assuage her uneasiness. As she watched her usual morning soap opera on TV, she seemed extraordinarily sensitive to noises from outside, starting from her seat any number of times. Let's just not talk about this, okay? I don't have any answers for you. Just let me handle it. This was all Asakawa could think to stay calm to say to calm his wife's anxieties. He couldn't allow himself to appear weak to his wife. Just as he was stepping out of the house, as if on cue, the phone rang. It was Ryuji. I made a fascinating discovery. I want you to tell me what you think. There was a hint of excitement in Ryuji's voice. Can't you tell me about it over the phone? I'm supposed to go pick up a rental car. A rental car? You're the one who told me to find out where the broadcasting originated from. Right. Listen, put that on the back burner for a while and get over here. Maybe you don't have to go looking for an antenna after all. Maybe the whole premise would just crumble away. Asakawa decided to pick the car up first anyway, so that if he still need to go to the South Hakone Pacific Land, he could leave straight from Ryuji's place. Asakawa parked the car with two wheels up on the sidewalk and banged on Ryuji's door. Enter, it's unlocked. Asakawa jerked the door open and deliberately stomped through the kitchen. So what's his big discovery? He asked forcefully. Asakawa jerked the... Oh. Wait. What's eating you? Ryuji glanced over from where he sat, cross-legged on the floor. Just hurry up and tell me what you found. Or relax. How am I supposed to relax? Just tell me already. Fair enough. This man is on edge because his wife is gonna fucking die too, along with their baby. Ryuji held his tongue for a moment, then gently asked, "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Asakawa plopped himself down in the middle of the floor, clenching his hands on his knees. My wife and my daughter watched that piece of shit. Well, that's a hell of a thing. I'm sorry to hear that. Ryuji, no. Ryuji watched until Asakawa began to regain his composure. The latter sneezed once and blew his nose loudly. Well, you want to save them, don't you? Asakawa nodded his head like a little boy. Well then, all the more reason to keep a cool head, so I won't tell you my conclusions. I'll just lay out the evidence. I want to see what the evidence suggests to you first. That's why I couldn't have you excited like that, see? I understand, Asakawa said meekly. Poor guy. Going through it. Now go wash your face or something. Pull yourself together. Asakawa could cry in front of Ryuji. Ryuji was the outlet for all the emotions he couldn't break down and show his wife. Poor guy. He came back into the room and wiping his face with a towel, and Ryuji held out a piece of paper. On it was a simple chart. Hold on, I'm gonna like... Hold on. I'm going to show the chart because I don't want to read all this. So this is the chart. Oh my god, what the hell? What the hell? Okay, here we go. So this is the chart that he wrote down. Okay, so this is the whole chart that he wrote down. Some things were clear at a glance. Ryuji had broken down the video into separate scenes. Last night I suddenly got the idea for this. You see what it is, right? The video consists of 12 scenes. I've given each one a number and a name. The number after the name is the length of the scene in seconds. The next number, in brackets, is, are you with me? The number of times the screen goes dark during that scene. Asakawa's expression was full of doubt. After you left yesterday, I started to examine other scenes besides the one with the infant, to see if they had any of these instances of darkness. And lo and behold, there were, in scenes 3, 4, 8, 10, and 11. And there it is, 3, 4, 8. 3, 4, 8, 10, and 11. The next column says real or abstract. What's that? Broadly speaking, we can divide the 12 scenes into these two categories. The abstract scenes, the ones like images in the mind, what I suppose we could almost call mental landscapes. And the real ones, scenes of things that really exist, that you could actually look at with your eyes. That's how I divided them up. Here, Ryuji paused for a second. Now look at the chart. Notice anything? Well, your black curtain only comes down on the real scenes. Right. That's absolutely right. Keep that in mind. Ryuji, this is getting annoying. Hurry up and tell me what you're driving at. What does this mean? Okay. See? Okay, now, hold your horses. Sometimes when one is given the answers up front, it dulls one's intuition. My intuition has already led me to a conclusion, and now that I have that in mind, I'll twist any phenomenon to rationalize holding onto the conclusion. It's like that in criminal investigations, too, isn't it? Once you get the notion that he's the guy, it suddenly seems like all the evidence agrees with you. See, we can't afford to wander off the track here. I need you to back up my conclusion. That is, I want to see, once you've taken a look at the evidence, if your intuition tells you the same thing mine told me. Okay, get on with it. Alright, the black curtain only appears when the scene is showing real landscapes. We've established that. Now, cast your mind back on the sensation you felt the first time you saw these images. We discussed the scene with the infant yesterday. Anything besides that? What about the scene with all the faces? Ryuji used the remote to find the scene. Take a good long look at those faces. The wall of dozens of faces slowly retreated, the number swelling into the hundreds, the thousands. Then he looked closely at them. Each one seemed different, just like real faces. How does this make you feel? Like somehow I'm the one being reproached. Like they're calling me a liar, a fraud. Right, as it happens, I felt the same thing, or at least what I felt was very similar to the sensation you're describing. Asakawa tried to concentrate his nerves on where that fact led. Ryuji was awaiting a clear response. Well? Asked Ryuji again. Asakawa shook his head. It's no good, I've got nothing. Well, if you had the leisure to spend more time thinking about it, you might notice the same thing I did. See, both of us have been thinking that these images were captured by a TV camera. In other words, by a machine with a lens. No? They weren't? Well, what's this black curtain that momentarily covers the screen? Ryuji advanced the film frame by frame until the screen went black. It stayed black for 3 or 4 frames. If you calculated one frame as a 13th of a second, then the darkness lasted for about 1/10 of a second. Why does this happen in the real scenes and not the imaged ones? Look closer at the screen. It's not completely black. Oh. What does he mean by that? Asakawa brought his face closer to the screen. Indeed, it wasn't totally dark. Something like a faint white haze hung suspended within the darkness. A blurred shadow. What we have here is a persistence of vision, and as you watch, don't you get an incredible sense of immediacy, as if you're actually a participant in the scene? Ryuji looked Asakawa full in the face and blinked once, slowly. The black curtain. Eh? Murmured Asakawa. Is this the blink of an eye? Exactly. Am I wrong? If you think about it, it's consistent. There are things we see with our eyes, but there are also scenes we conjure up in our minds. And since these don't pass through the retina, there's no blinking involved. But when we actually look with our eyes, images are formed according to the strength of the light that hits the retina. And to keep the retina from drying out, we blink unconsciously. Bro. The black curtain is the instance when the eyes shut. Once again, Asakawa was filled with nausea. The first time he'd finished watching the video, he'd run to the toilet, but this time the evil chill was even worse. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had climbed into his body. This video hadn't been recorded by a machine. A human being's eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, all 5 senses have been used to make this video. Bro. That's wild. These chills, the shivering, were from somebody's shadow sneaking into... Oh. These chills, the shivering, were from somebody's shadow sneaking into him through his sense organs. Asakawa had been watching the video from the same perspective as this thing within him. He mopped his brow again and again, but still it was a damp and cold sweat. Damp with cold sweat. Did you know? Hey, are you listening? Individual differences aside, the average man blinks 20 times a minute, and the average woman 15 times. That means that it might have been a woman who recorded these images. Asakawa couldn't hear him. Hehehe. What's the matter? You look like you're dead already. You're so pale. Ryuji laughed. Look at the bright side. We're one step closer to a solution now. If these images were collected by the sense organs of a particular person, then the charm must have something to do with the person's will. In other words, maybe she wants us to do something. Oop. Asakawa had temporarily lost his faculty for reason. Ryuji's words vibrated in his ears, but their meaning didn't make it to his brain. At any rate, we now know what we have to do. We have to find out who this person is. Or was. I think he or she is probably no longer with us. And then we have to find out what this person desired while he or she was still alive. And that'll be the charm that will allow us to go on living. Ryuji winked at Asakawa as if to say, How I'm doing. Asakawa had left the number 3 Tokyo-Yokohama freeway and was now headed south on the Yokohama-Yokosuka road. Ryuji had reclined the passenger seat and was sleeping a perfect stressless sleep. Buddy! It was almost 2 in the afternoon, but Asakawa wasn't the least bit hungry. Asakawa reached out a hand to wake Ryuji, but then pulled it back. They weren't at their destination yet. Asakawa didn't even really know what their destination was. All Ryuji had done was tell him to drive to Kamakura. He didn't know where they were going or why they were going there. It made him nervous, irritable, made him a nervous, irritable driver. Ryuji had packed in a hurry, saying he had explained where they were going once they were in the car, but once underway... Oh. Hi, Luna! Thank you for the raid! Hi, Ducky!
Why is the rum always gone?
Thank you. Hello, hello. Anyways, thank you for the raid again. And so thank you for coming to my reading corner. I am reading Ring, and yes, it is the novel that inspired the movies. So, and currently, Judy Blume? What? Yeah, the Ramona books, yeah. So how did you get gaslit? What? What the hell? What? What the hell? That's I was not expecting that, but okay. funny. That's funny. That's funny. Wild and funny. God, that's so funny though. Like, you were gaslit. Well, right on the emotional roller coaster. Well, you could just sit back and relax here and listen to the sequence of events that are happening right now. So the main character, Asakawa, last chapter found out he left the cursed tape at his house. Fine, whatever. Because he went to see one of his friends. Because they also watched the movie. They also watched it. Fine, whatever. So him and his friend are gonna die. Went back home. And was just like, why does this tape look different? He realized it was watched. And the only other person in the house was his wife. So his wife watched the tape. And now she has 7 days to live. And also, their baby watched it too. So the whole family is on the hit list of being got by Sawako. Yeah, the baby. And then the dad, the main character, he was raving all about how if he couldn't figure out in time the whole thing that's going on, his wife and his child can like live off his life insurance and other shit like that. Because I think in Japan or whatever, like once somebody dies, like they get like their pay and shit like that, like for life and something like that. I don't know how it is. So don't quote me on that. That's all I'm just like remembering off the top of my head. But yeah, he was just like, if he's gone, they could use his life insurance and stuff like that. But no. She watched the tape with the baby. So now everybody in the family is now gonna get got if they don't figure it out in time. So currently the main character and his friend Ryuji are going to wherever, because they've been like pinpointing like different stuff. Ryuji like found out like where the dialect was coming from, like from one of the people in the movie. And they just found out that all this, like everything that in the video was recorded from like a woman's perspective. So yeah, that's what's going on now. Oh my god. Yeah, funny. I'm like, out of everybody, I didn't expect the baby to be involved. Okay. 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 I didn't. So yeah. So they're currently in the car, going to where they were going, and then Ryuji, the other guy that watched the tape, was like, I didn't sleep last night. Don't wake me till Kamakura, and he'd probably gone to sleep. exited the Yokohama Yokosuka Road at Asahina and then took the Kanazawa Road 5 kilometers until they reached Kamakura Station. Ryuji had been asleep for a good 2 hours. Hey, we're here, said Asakawa, shaking him. Ryuji stretched his body like a cat, rubbing his eyes with the backs of his hands, and shook his head rapidly from side to side, lips flapping. I was having such a pleasant dream. What do we do now? Ryuji sat up and looked out the window to see where he was. Just go straight on this road, and then when we reach the outer gate to the Hachiman Shrine, turn left to stop. Then Ryuji went to lie down again, saying, maybe I can still catch the tail end of that dream if you don't mind. Look, we'll be there in 5 minutes. If you got time to sleep, you got time to explain to me what we're doing here. You'll see once we get there, said Ryuji, jamming his knees up against the dashboard and going back to sleep. Asakawa made the left and stopped. Dead ahead was an old 2-story house with a small sign reading Tetsuzo Miura Memorial Hall. Pull into the parking lot. Ryuji had apparently opened his eyes slightly. He wore a satisfied look and his nostrils were flared, like he was sniffing perfume. Thanks to you, I was able to finish my dream. What was it about? Said Asakawa as he turned the steering wheel. What do you think? I was flying. I love dreams where I'm flying. Ryuji snorted happily and licked his lips. His crusty lips. The Tetsuzo Miura Memorial Hall looked deserted. A large open space on the ground floor featured photographs and documents in frames on the wall or in cases under glass, and an outline of the Miura Fellows' achievements were placed onto the center wall. Reading it, Asakawa finally figured out who the man was. Excuse me, is there anyone here? Called Ryuji into the depths of the building. There was no reply. Tetsuzo Miura had died 2 years ago at the age of 72, after retiring from a professorship at Yokodai University. He had specialized in theoretical physics, concentrating on theories of matter and statistical dynamics. But the Memorial Hall, modest as it was, didn't result from his achievements as a physicist, but from his scientific investigations of paranormal phenomena. Interesting. The resume on the wall claimed the resume or resume. One of the two. Claimed that the wall claimed that the professor's theories had attracted worldwide interest, although undoubtedly only a limited number of people had actually paid any attention. After all, Asakawa had never even heard of the guy. And what exactly were this man's theories? To find the answer, Asakawa began to examine the items on the walls and in the display cases. Thoughts have energy, and that energy Asakawa had read this far when he heard, echoing from another room, the sound of someone hurrying downstairs. A door opened and a 40-ish man with a mustache poked his head in. Ryuji approached the man, holding out one of his business cards. Asakawa decided to follow his example and took his own card holder from his breast pocket. My name is Takayama. I am at Fukuzawa University. He spoke smoothly and affably. Asakawa was amused at how different he sounded. Asakawa held out his own card. Faced with the credentials of an academic and a reporter, the man looked rather dismayed. It was Asakawa's card he was frowning at. If it's alright, there's something we'd like to consult with you about. Now that's interesting. The thoughts having energy thing, that's honestly quite interesting. I can't actually believe it. Okay, what would that be? The man eyed them cautiously. As a matter of fact, I once had the pleasure of meeting the late Professor Miura. For some reason, the man seemed relieved to hear this and relaxed his expression. He brought out 3 folding chairs and arranged them to face each other. Is that so? Please, have a seat. It must have been about 3 years ago. Yes, that's right. It was the year before he died. My alma mater was sounding me out about possibly giving a lecture at the scientific method, and I thought I might take the opportunity to hear what the professor had to say. Was it here in this house? Yes, Professor Takasuka introduced us. Hearing this name, the man at last smiled. He realized he had something in common with his visitors. These two must be on our side. They're not here to attack us after all. I see. I'm sorry about all that. My name is Tetsuaki Miura. Sorry, I'm fresh out of business cards. So you must be the professor's... Yes, I'm his only son. Hardly worth of the name, though. Is that right? Well, I had no idea the professor has such an outstanding son. It was all Asakawa could do to keep from laughing at the sight of Ryuji, addressing a man 10 years older than himself and calling him an outstanding son. I could feel that, yes. Tetsuaki Miura showed them around briefly. Some of his late father's students had gotten together after his death to open the house to the public and to put in order of the materials he'd collected over the years. As for Tetsuaki himself, he said, somewhat self-deprecatingly, that he hadn't been able to become a researcher like his father had wanted, but instead had built an inn on the same lot as the hall and devoted himself to managing it. So here I'm exploiting both his land and his reputation. Like I say, I'm hardly a worthy son. Poor guy. Tetsuaki gave a chagrined laugh. His inn was used largely for high school excursions, mostly physics and biology clubs, but he also mentioned a group devoted to parapsychological research. High school clubs needed to have a reason to go on trips. Basically, the memorial hall was bait to bring in student groups. By the way, Ryuji sat up straight and tried to guide the conversation to the heart of the matter. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I've been boring you, babbling on like this, so tell me what brings you here. It was apparent that Tetsuaki didn't have much in the way of talent for science. He was nothing but a merchant who adjusted his attitude to suit the situation. Asakawa could tell that Ryuji thought little of the man. To tell you the truth, we're looking for someone. Who? Actually, we don't know the name. That's why we're here. I'm afraid I don't follow you. Tetsuaki looked troubled, as if the urge his visitors to make a little more sense. We can't even say for sure if this person is still alive or has already died. What's clear is that this person had powers that ordinary people don't. Ryuji paused to watch Tetsuaki, who seemed to understand immediately what he meant. Your father was probably Japan's greatest collector of this sort of information. He told me that. Using a network of connections he himself had forged, he had assembled a list of people all over the country with paranormal powers. Oh. We're getting somewhere. Okay. He said he was storing the information. Tetsuaki's face clouded over. Surely they weren't going to ask him to search through all those records for a single name. Yes, of course, the files have been preserved, but there are so many of them, and many of those people are frauds anyway. Tetsuaki blanched at the thought of looking through all those files again. It had taken a dozen of his father's students several months to organize them, following the wishes of the deceased. They'd included even uncertain cases, swelling the number of files even further. We certainly don't intend to put you in any trouble. With your permission, we'll search through them ourselves, just the two of us. They're in the archives upstairs. Perhaps you'd like to have a look at them first. Tetsuaki stood up. They could only talk like that because they had no idea how much there was. Once they had a look at all those shelves, he had the feeling they wouldn't feel like tackling them. He led them to the second floor. The archives were in a high-ceilinged room at the head of the stairs. They entered the room to find themselves facing two bookcases of 7 shelves each. Each file book contained materials related to 40 cases, and at first glance, there seemed to be thousands of file books. Ooh. Asakawa didn't notice Ryuji's reaction. He was too busy turning pale himself. If we spent time on this, we would well die here in this gloomy room. There's got to be another way. Ryuji, unfazed, asked, "Do you mind if we have a look?" Go right ahead. Tetsuaki stayed and watched them for a little while, half out of astonishment and half out of curiosity to see just what they thought they'd find. But eventually, he seemed to have given up on them. "I've got work to do," he said, leaving. When they were alone, Asakawa turned to Ryuji and spoke. "So, want to tell me what's going on?" His voice was a bit thick because he was still craning his neck looking at all the files. These were the first words he'd spoken since entering the hall. The files were arranged in chronological order, beginning with 1956 and ending in 1988. 1988, that was the year Miura had died. Only death has brought down the curtain on his 32-year quest. We don't have much time, so I'll tell you while we look. I'll start with 1956. You start with 1960. Asakawa tentatively pulled out a file and flipped through it, each page containing at least one photo and a piece of paper on which had written a sort of short description as well as a name on an address. What am I looking for? Pay attention to names and addresses. We're trying to find a woman from Izu Oshima Island. A woman? Said Asakawa, cocking his head questioningly. Remember the old woman on the video? She told somebody they were going to give birth. Think she was talking to a man? Fair enough. That is valid. That is a valid assumption. So they narrowed. Ryuji was right. Men could not bear children. So they started searching. It was a simple, repetitive task, and since Asakawa asked why these files existed in the first place, Ryuji explained. Professor Miura had always been interested in supernatural phenomena. In the 50s, he'd begun experiments with paranormal powers, but he hadn't gotten any results reliable enough to allow him to formulate a scientific theory. Clairvoyants would find themselves unable to do in front of an audience what they had done easily before. It took a lot of concentration to be able to display these powers. Fair enough, actually. That's actually something that is actually kind of a thing. What Professor Miyoto was searching for was the kind of person who could exert his or her powers at any time, under any circumstances. He could see that if the person failed in front of witnesses, then Miyoto himself would be called a fraud. He was convinced that there must be more people out there with paranormal powers that he knew about, so he set about finding them. But how was he able to do this? He couldn't interview everybody to check for clairvoyance, second sight, telekinesis, so he came up with a method. To anybody who might possibly have such powers, he sent a piece of film in a securely sealed envelope and asked them to imprint upon it with their minds a certain pattern or image and then send it back to him, still sealed. In this way, he could test the powers of people even at great distances. And since such psychic photography seemed to be a fairly basic power, people who possessed it often seemed to be clairvoyant as well. In 1956, he'd begun to recruit paranormals from all over the country, with the help of former students of his who had gone to work for publishers and newspapers. These former students helped set up a network which would report any rumor of supernatural powers straight back to Professor Miura. However, an examination of the film returned to him suggested that no more than a tenth of claimants actually had any powers. The rest had skillfully broken the seal and replaced the film. Obvious cases of deception were weeded out at this point, but cases where it wasn't clear one way or the other were kept, ultimately resulting in an unmanageable collection Asakawa saw before him. In the years since Miura had started, the network had been perfected through the development of the mass media and an increase in the number of participating former students. The data had piled up year after year until the man died. Ooh. I see, murmured Asakawa. So that's the meaning of this collection. But how do we know that the name of the person we're looking for is in here? I'm not saying it definitely is, but there's a strong possibility it's here. I mean, look at what she did. You know yourself that there are a few people who can actually produce psychic photos, but there can't be too many paranormals who can actually project images onto the television tube without any equipment whatsoever. That's power of the very highest order. Wow, it's already an hour. Wow. Someone with that kind of power would stand out, even if they didn't try to. I don't think Miyoto's network would have let someone like that slip through. Asakawa had to admit that the possibility was genuine. He'd redoubled his efforts. By the way, why am I looking at 1960? Asakawa suddenly looked up. Remember the scene in the video that showed a television? It was a rather old model. One of the early sets from the 50s or early 60s. That doesn't necessarily mean... Shut up, we're talking about probabilities here, right? Asakawa chided himself for being so irritated this last little while. But he had good reason to be. Given the limited time frame, the number of files was huge. It would have been more unnatural to be calm about it. At the moment, Asakawa saw the word Izu Oshima in the file he was holding. Hey, got one! He yelled triumphantly. Ryuji turned around, surprised, and peered at the file. Motomachi, Izu Oshima. Teruko Tsuchida, age 37. Postmarked February 14th, 1960. A black and white photograph showing a white lightning-like slash against a black background. The description read, subject sent this with a note predicting a cross-shaped image. No traces of substitution. How about that? Asakawa trembled with excitement as he waited for Ryuji's response. It's a possibility. Take down the name and address just in case. Ryuji turned back to his own research. Asakawa felt better for having found a likely candidate so soon, but at the same time, he was a bit dissatisfied with Ryuji's brusque reaction. Well, 2 hours passed. He didn't find another woman from Izu Oshima. Some of the submissions were either from Tokyo itself or the surrounding Kanto region. Tetsuaki appeared, offering them tea and 2 or 3 possibly sarcastic comments before leaving. Their hands on the files were getting slower and slower. They'd been at it for 2 hours and hadn't polished off a year's worth. Finally, somehow, Asakawa got through 1960. As he went to start in 1961, he happened to glance at Ryuji. Ryuji was sitting there, cross-legs on the floor, motionless, face buried in an open file. Is he asleep, the idiot? Asakawa reached out his hand, but then Ryuji emitted a stifled groan. I'm so hungry, I could die. How about you go buy us some takeout and oolong tea? Make reservations for this evening at Le Petit Pension Soleil. What the hell? That's the inn the guy runs. I know that, but why would I want to stay there with you? You'd rather not? For starters, we haven't got time to lounge around at an inn. Even if we find her now, there's no way to get to Izu Oshima right now. We can't go anywhere today. Don't you think it'd be better to get a good night's sleep and marshal our energies for tomorrow? Asakawa felt an indescribable aversion to spending the night with Ryuji at an inn, but there was no alternative. So he gave up and went out to buy food and tell Tetsuaki and Miura they'd be staying the night. Then he and Ryuji ate their takeout and drank their oolong tea. It was 7 in the evening, a brief respite. His arms were tired and his shoulders stiff. His eyes swam. He took off his glasses. Instead, he held the files close enough to his face that he could lick them if he wanted. He had to use all his concentration or he was afraid he'd miss something, which tired him even more. 9 o'clock. The silence of the archives was broken by Ryuji's mad screech. I found it finally! So that's where she was hiding. Ooh? We got a breach! Asik. I'm pretty sure he was licking the files. So, Miss Girl. Asakawa felt himself drawn to the file. He sat down next to Ryuji and put his glasses back on to look at it. It said, Izu Oshima, Sashikiji, Sadako Yamamura, age 10. The envelope was postmarked August 29th, 1958. Subject sent this with a note predicting it would be imprinted with her own name. She's the real thing, without a doubt. Attached was a photograph showing the character Yama, mountain, in white against a black background. Asakawa had seen the character somewhere before. That's it. His voice trembled. On the video, the scene of the eruption of Mount Mihara had been followed immediately by a shot of the character for Mountain. Identical to this one. Not only that, the screen of the old television in the 10th scene had displayed the character Sada. This woman's name was Sadako Yamamura. Miss Girl finally found. The description read, subject sent this with an... Okay, oh, wait. I read this. It went back. The woman's name was Sadako Yamamura. What do you think? Asked Ryuji. No question about it. This is it. At long last, Asakawa found help. Thought crossed his mind that maybe, just maybe, they'd beat the deadline. So they finally found Miss Girl. Miss Sadako herself. October 16th, Tuesday. 10:15 a.m. Ryuji and Asakawa were on a high-speed passenger boat that had just left port at Atami. There was no regular ferry linking Oshima and the mainland, so they'd have to leave the car in the parking lot next to the Atami Korakuen Hotel. Asakawa was still clutching the key in his left hand. They were scheduled to arrive on Oshima in an hour. A strong wind blew and it looked like rain. Most of the passengers hadn't ventured out onto the deck, but stayed huddled in their reserved seats. Asakawa and Ryuji had been in too much of a hurry to check before buying their tickets, but it looked like a typhoon was approaching. The waves were large and the rocking of the boat was worse than normal. Sipping a can of hot coffee, Asakawa went over the whole chain of events again in his mind. He wasn't sure if they should congratulate themselves for having come this far, or reproach themselves for not having found out about Sadako Yamamura and set out for Oshima Island earlier. How the fuck would anybody know this, though? Who the fuck would chain these links? Who would? Genuinely, who would? Okay, everything had hung on, noticing that the black curtain flashing momentarily over the images of the video were eyelids blinking. The images had been recorded not by machine, but by the human sensory apparatus. Essentially, the person had focused her energies on the video deck at cabin 4B while it was recording, and created not a psychic photo, but a psychic video. Girl. This surely indicated paranormal powers of immeasurable proportions. Ryuji had assumed that such a person would stand out from the crowd and gone looking for her, and had ultimately found out her name. Not that they knew for sure that Sadako Yamamura was in fact the culprit. She was still just a suspect. They were heading to Oshima in order to follow up on the suspicions. The sea was rough, causing the boat to pitch and roll violently. Asakawa felt an ugly premonition come over him. Maybe it hadn't been such a good idea for both of them to go to Oshima. What if they got tied down by the typhoon and couldn't leave the island? Who'd save his wife and daughter? The deadline was almost at hand, 10:04 p.m. The day after tomorrow. Asakawa warmed his hands with the coffee can and shrank down into his seat. I still can't believe it, that a human being could really do something like that. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not now, does it? Ryuji answered without taking his eyes off the map of Oshima. Anyways, it's reality staring you in the face, All we're seeing is one small part of a continuously changing phenomenon. Ryuji set the map down on his knee. You know about the Big Bang, right? They believe that the universe was born in a tremendous explosion 20 billion years ago. I can mathematically express the form of the universe from its birth to the present. It's all about different equations. Most phenomena in the universe can be expressed with different equations, you know. Using them, you can figure out what the universe looked like 100 million years ago, 10 billion years ago, even a second of a tenth of a second after the initial explosion. But, no matter how far we go back, no matter how we try to express it, we can't just know what it looked like at zero. At the very moment of the explosion. Okay. And another thing. And then there's another thing. How is our universe going to end? Is the universe expanding or contracting? See, we don't know the beginning and we don't know the end. All we know about is the in-between stuff, and that, my friend, is what life is like. Ryuji poked Asakawa in the arm. I guess you're right. I can look at photo albums and get a reasonable idea of what I was like when I was 3 years old, or when I was a newborn. See what I mean? But what's before birth? What's after death? There are things we just don't know. See what I mean? But after death, there are things we just don't know. After death, when you die, that's the end. You just disappear. That's all, right? Hey, have you ever died? No, I haven't. Oh, Asuka said in utter earnestness. Well then, you don't know, do you? You don't know where you go after you die. Are you saying there's such a thing as spirits? Look, all I can say is, I just don't know. But when you're talking about the birth of life, I think things go a lot more smoother when you posit the existence of a soul. None of the claptrap of the modern molecular biologists actually sounds real. What are they really saying? Take hundreds each of 20-odd different amino acids, put them in a bowl, mix them all together, add a little electrical energy, and voila, protein. And the building block of life. And they really expect us to believe that? Might as well tell us we're all children of God. At least that'd be easier to swallow. What I think is that there's a completely different kind of energy involved at the moment of birth. Almost like there's a certain will at work. Okay, Ryuji seemed to lean a little closer to Asakawa, but then he suddenly changed the subject. By the way, I couldn't help but notice you were engrossed in the professor's, I think it's a French word, oeuvre, whatever the fuck you say it. Back at the memorial hall, come across anything interesting? Now that he mentioned it, Asakawa remembered that he had started to read something. Thoughts have energy, and that energy. I think it is something about thoughts being energy. What else? I didn't have time to finish reading it. That's too bad. You were just getting to the good part. The professor could really make me laugh. The way that he'd set out not only serious things that could shock normal people. What the old man was saying basically is that the ideas are life forms with energy of their own. Huh. That's actually kind of an interesting take, not gonna lie. Huh? You mean the thoughts in our heads can turn into living beings? That's about the size of it. Well, that's a rather extreme suggestion. It is indeed. But similar ideas have been propounded since the time of Christ. I suppose you could just look at it as a different theory of life. Yep, here we go. Having said this much, Ryuji suddenly seemed to lose interest in the conversation, returning his gaze to the map. Asakawa understood that Ryuji was saying, most of it anyway, but it didn't sit very well with him. We may not be able to scientifically explain what we're facing, but it's real, and because it's real, we have to face it as a real phenomenon and deal with it as such, even if we don't understand its cause or effect. What we need to concentrate on right now is figuring out the riddle of the charm and saving our own asses, not unlocking all the secrets of the supernatural. Ryuji might have had some good points, but what Asakawa really needed from him were clearer answers. Fair enough. The farther out of the sea they went, the worse the motion of the boat, and Asakawa began to worry he'd get seasick. The more he thought about it, the more he thought he felt an unsettling feeling in his chest. Ryuji, who had been nodding off, suddenly raised his head and looked outside. The sea was throwing up dark gray waves, and in the distance they could see the dim shadow of an island. You know, Asakawa, something's worrying me. What? The 4 kids who stayed at the log cabin, why didn't they try to carry out the charm? That again. Isn't it obvious? They didn't believe the video. Well, that's what I thought. It explained why they pulled a prank like erasing the charm. But I was remembering a trip I took with the track team back in high school. In the middle of the night, Saito comes bursting in the room. You remember Saito, right? Kind of not quite all there. There were 12 of us on the team, and we all were sleeping together in one room. And that idiot comes running in, teeth chattering, and screams, "I've seen a ghost!" He opened the bathroom door and saw a little girl crouched behind the trash can by the sink. She was crying. Now, aside from me, how do you think the other 10 guys reacted to this? They probably half believed and half laughed it off. Ryuji shook his head again. That's how it worked in a horror movie or on TV. At first, no one takes it seriously, and then one by one, they'd pricked off for the monster, right?
Why is the rum always gone?
Thanks, Jay. But it's different in real life. Every single one of them, without exception, believed him. All 10 of them. And not because of all 10 of them, or especially Chicken either. You could try it on any group of people and get the same results. The fundamental sense of terror is built into us humans on the instinctual level. So what you're saying is, it's strange that those 4 didn't believe the video. As he listened to Ryuji's story, Asakawa was recalling the face of his daughter, crying from seeing the demon mask. He remembered how puzzled he'd been. How had she known the demon mask was supposed to be scary? Well, the scene in the videos don't tell a story, and they're not all that frightening to just look at. So I suppose it's possible to disbelieve it. But weren't they at least bothered, those 4? What would you do? If you were told that carrying out a charm would save your life, even if you didn't believe in it, wouldn't you feel you ought to give it a try anyway? I would have expected at least one of them to break rank. I mean, even if he or she insisted on putting on a brave face in front of the others, he or she could always perform the charm in secret after getting back to Tokyo. Fair enough. That is honestly valid. Asakawa's bad feeling grew stronger. He had actually wondered the same thing himself. What if the charm turns out to be something impossible? So maybe it was something they couldn't carry out, and so they convinced themselves they didn't believe it anyway. An example occurred to Asakawa. What if a woman who had been murdered left a message in the world of the living in an effort to get someone else to adventure, so that she could be at peace? Hehe. I know what you're thinking. What would you do if that turned out to be the case? I will BRB. Okay. So they found where Miss Girl is from, and they are now finding out everything else. Okay. Okay. Asukawa asked himself if the charm included a command to kill someone, would he be able to do it? Would he be able to kill a perfect stranger to save his own life? But what worried him more was if it came to that, who would be the one to carry out the charm? He shook his head furiously. Stop thinking such stupid things. All I could do at the moment was pray that this Sadako Yamamura person desire was something that anybody could fulfill. The outlines of the island were becoming clearer. The wharf at Motomachi Harbor was slowly coming into view. Listen, Ryuji, I have a favor to ask. Asakawa spoke favorably. What's that? If I don't make it in time, that is, Asakawa couldn't bring himself to say the word die. If you figure out the charm, then the very next day, could you? Well, there's my wife and daughter. Ryuji cut in. Of course. Leave it to me. I'll be responsible for saving wifey and babykins. Asakawa took out one of his business cards and wrote a phone number on the back. I'm going to send them to her parents' house in Ashikaga until we solve this thing. This is the number there. I'm going to give it to you now, before I forget. Ryuji put the card in his pocket without even glancing at it. Just then came the announcement that the ship had docked at Motomachi on Oshima Island. Asakawa intended to call home from the waterfront and convince his wife to go home to her parents for a while. He didn't know when he'd get back to Tokyo. Who knew? Time might run out for him here on Oshima. He couldn't stand the thought of his family alone and terrified in their little condo. As he walked down the gangway, Ryuji asked, Hey, Asakawa, do a wife and kid really mean that much? It was a very un-Ryuji-like question. Asakawa couldn't help but laugh as he replied, You'll find out one of these days. But Asakawa didn't really think Ryuji was capable of starting a normal family. Oh. Fair enough, not gonna lie. He is a bit of a... Not a bit. He really is a shit person, so... Yeah. I mean, Ryuji assaulted 3 women. So... no sympathy for him. Okay, the wind was strong here on the pier of Oshima than it had been on the wharf at Atami. Overhead, the clouds were scurrying from west to east, while underfoot the concrete jetty shook with the force of waves breaking against it. The rain wasn't falling that hard, but the raindrops, borne by the wind, were hitting Asakawa's head face head on. Neither of them had umbrellas. They jammed their hands in their pockets and hunched forward as they walked quickly along the pier over the ocean. Islanders holding placards for car rental companies or banners for inns were there to greet the tourists. Asakawa lifted his head and looked for the person who was supposed to meet them. Before getting on the boat at the harbor in Atami, Asakawa had contacted his office and asked for the phone number of the Oshima office, ultimately enlisting the help of a correspondent named Hayatsu. None of the national news organizations had full-fledged bureaus on Oshima. Instead, they hired locals as stringers. These correspondents kept an eye on island doings, watching for any noteworthy incidents or interesting episodes, and reporting them to the main office. They were also responsible for assisting any reporters dispatched to the island on stories. Wow. Hayatsu had worked for the Daily News before retiring here to Oshima. His territory included not just Oshima itself, but all 7 islands in the Izu chain. And when anything happened, he didn't have to wait for a reporter to arrive from headquarters, who could file his own articles. Hayatsu had a network of contacts on the island, so cooperation promised to speed up Asakawa's investigation. On the phone, Hayatsu himself had responded positively to Asakawa's request, promising to meet him at the jetty. Since they never met, Asakawa had described himself and said he was traveling with a friend. "Excuse me," he heard a voice from behind. "Are you Mr. Asakawa?" "Yes. I'm Hayatsu, the Oshima correspondent." He held out umbrellas and smiled good-naturedly. "Sorry to pose on you so suddenly like this. We really appreciate your help."
Why is the rum always gone? Here we go. As they hurried to Hayatsu's car, Asakawa introduced Ryuji. The wind was so loud they could hardly speak over it until they'd climbed inside the vehicle. It was a compact but surprisingly spacious inside. Asakawa rode in front, Ryuji in the back. "Shall we go straight to Takahashi Yamamura's house?" asked Hayatsu, both hands on the steering wheel. He was over 60 and had a full head of hair, though much of it was gray. "So you've already found Sadako Yamamura's family?" Asakawa had already told Hayatsu on the phone that they were coming to investigate someone by that name. "It's a small town. Once you said it was a Yamamura from Sashikiji, I knew right away who it was. There's only one family by that name here. Yamamura is a fisherman who runs his house as a bed and breakfast in the summertime. What do you think? We could have him put you up there tonight. Of course, you're welcome at my place, too. but it's a little small and run down. I'm sure having you stay there would be an imposition on you. Hayato laughed. He and his wife lived alone, but he wasn't exaggerating. They really didn't have room to sleep two guests. Asakawa looked at Ryuji. I'm fine with that. Hayatsu's little car sped towards the Sashikiji district on the southern tip of the island. Sped as much as it could, that is. The Oshima Ring Road circled the island, was too narrow and winding to go very fast on. The vast majority of the cars they passed were all compacts. At Ooh. At times, the field of vision opened up to their right to reveal the ocean. When it did, the sound of the wind would change. The sea was dark, reflecting the deep leaden color of the sky, and it heaved violently, throwing up white caps. If it hadn't been for those brief flashes of white, it would have been difficult to tell where the sky stopped and the sea began, or where the sea stopped and the land began. The longer they gazed at it, the more depressing it seemed. The radio blared a typhoon alert, and their surroundings became that much darker. They veered right at a fork in the road and immediately entered a tunnel of camellias. They could see bare roots beneath the camellias, tangled and wizened. Long years of exposure to wind and rain had eroded some of the plant's soil. Now they were wet and slick with rain. It looked to Asakawa that they were speeding through the intestines of a huge monster. Sashikiji is dead ahead, said Hayatsu, but I don't think this Sadako Yamamura woman is here anymore. You can get the details from Takashi Yamamura. From what I hear, he's a cousin of her mother's. How old would this Sadako be now? Said Asakawa. For some time now, Ryuji had been scrunched down in the back seat, uttering not a word. I've never actually met her, but if she's still alive, she must be 42, 43 maybe. If she's still alive? Asakawa wondered why Hayatsu had used that expression. Maybe she was missing? Suddenly he was filled with misgivings. What if they'd come all this way to Oshima only to find no one knew if she was dead or alive? What if this was a dead end? Finally, the car pulled up in front of a two-story house bearing the sign Yamamura Manor.
god.
Okay, honestly, I think after this, like little tidbit, I'm probably gonna head out. Okay. Okay. Finally, the car pulled up in front of a two-story house bearing the sign Yamamura Manor. It stood on a gentle slope with a commanding view of the ocean. No doubt, in good weather, the scenery was splendid. In the offing, they could make out the triangular shape of an island. That was Toshima. When the weather is nice, you can see Nijima, Shiki Najima, and even Kozusashima from here, said Hayatsu, proudly pointing south over the sea. Whew. Okay. So that was a nice read. They found out more about Miss Goro, Miss Salako herself. Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. Let's see. Okay, so I am going to head out now, but first, all right. So good night, goodbye, good morning, or good afternoon, or whenever you're watching this. See you all tomorrow. Goodbye.